Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. We're going to continue hearing evidence from Mr. Meakins. So first thing I'm going to do is to see if Mr. Meakins is there and whether he can hear me and see me clearly. Mr. Meakins.
I can hear you and see you clearly, sir. Yes.
Very good. Thank you very much. Well then, Ms. Grange, it's over to you. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Mr. Meakins, can I just pick up on a few points from the evidence just before the break? You told us that your induction consisted of a week in France, and then you were back in the UK, and then you went back to France again. Were you back in France in time for a sales meeting on the 2nd of July 2015, do you think?
I can't recall, I can't honestly be certain. I don't remember a sales meet. I may well have been, but I can't be certain, I'm sorry.
Okay, I'll come to some documents in a little while in your evidence that might help you recollect that, but we just wanted to clarify that at this stage. And you said in your evidence that you didn't appreciate during your training and induction that PE was combustible, but that there did come a time when you came to appreciate that. When was that, and how did you learn of that?
Well, I think for certain after the Grenfell fire, I think everybody was more aware of how combustible the PE really is. But up until that time, I was pretty much, I knew it was a standard core, but really didn't know that it was as combustible as what it's turned out to be.
So are you saying now that you didn't think it was combustible at all prior to the Grenfell fire?
I was unaware that it was combustible in a sense where it would fuel in a fire, if you like. But I'm not very technically minded, so in a way, I knew it was a PE core, standard core. I knew it was some form of plastic, but I didn't realise it was as combustible as what it's turned out to be.
I appreciate that, but if you'd been asked, let's say in 2016, this core, this PE core, is it a combustible material? What would your answer have been?
I think it probably would have been it's a very difficult question to answer, because if I would never have been selling or involved in a product if I knew how combustible it was. So I probably would have said it's our standard core. It has some form of plastic in it, but I wouldn't necessarily have said it's highly combustible material, because I was unaware of that. I didn't realise.
I appreciate you might not have said it was a highly combustible material, but would you have said it was a combustible material?
I probably wouldn't have done. The answer to that is probably not. I would have said it's a standard core. It may... No, I'm really sorry. I can't really answer that question and say I would have said it was a combustible material. Because if I for any reason thought that it would have been a very combustible material or a combustible material, then I would have asked questions to why we were selling it at all. I
see. Did you ever discuss the combustibility of polyethylene with Claude Verler or any member of his technical team in Merxheim in France?
I can't recall ever talking to them about the combustible material, the PE material, no.
You have no recollection of that sort of discussion at all?
I have no recollection of talking about combustibility and PE, no.
Talking about combustibility at all in relation to any of the Rainabond products?
I can honestly say, no, I can't remember that we had a conversation about the products being combustible.
I see. Did you ever discuss the combustibility of PE with any fabricators in the years 2015, 2016?
I'm trying to think if there was an instance that we spoke about combustibility prior to the Grenfell fire. And there's nothing that stands out in my mind that I would have spoken to any fabricators with regards to combustibility and PE.
What about its poor fire performance? Did you ever discuss its poor fire performance in general terms with any fabricators in 2015, 2016, and prior to the fire?
Prior to the fire, I can't recall, I can't remember ever talking to any fabricators about the combustibility of PE, no.
And what about with any other customers in the UK discussing the poor fire performance of PE? Do you have any recollection of that?
I can't, unless I would have been asked the question. I can't remember being asked any direct question about how combustible PE was. So in answer to that question, I just can't remember, I'm afraid, sorry.
I see. Thinking back to your induction then, and when you met the teams in France, did you discuss with them the fact that the standard core for the Reynabond product in the UK was the PE core?
Yes, because standard core would, in my eyes, was a standard black PE core at that time.
I see. And was there any discussion at that time about the difference between the standard PE core and the FR core with Claude Verler and his team, or anyone else at Merxheim?
I was aware that the PE core was a standard core and the FR core was a fire retardant core. But that's as far as I understood it to be. I'm sorry, no.
So the level of your understanding never went beyond that. Is that your evidence?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Did your understanding about Reynabond PE's performance in fire ever change during the time that you worked at Arconic?
I think with specifications that were coming through on the market and they were being asked for an FR core over a PE core, then sure, it changed. You know, I'd ask the question to why not a PE core, and it doesn't perform very well in a fire. So it needs to be specified an FR core in this case, but that would be as far as it sort of went, really.
I see. And when did those kind of discussions start taking place, where you were being told that the reason they didn't want a PE core was because it didn't perform well in fire?
I'm trying to think of an instance, a particular project, but it would have been a main contractor or a specifier or someone that would have specified that it had to be an FR core, because that was what was written in the specification, because they wouldn't accept a PE core as a standard core. So I would obviously put forward the fire retardant, the FR core.
And when that was brought to your attention by these main contractors or other professionals, did you go back to Merxheim and have a conversation with them about still selling the PE core if it performed worse in fire?
I can honestly say I didn't, no.
Can we have a look at something that Mr. Verler says in his witness statement at this point? If we can pull that up, that's at MET 53190 at page 27. And I want to look at paragraph 94 of this statement in the first two sentences in that paragraph. So Mr. Verler says this: since PE, polyethylene, is a plastic, it is of course combustible. In other words, it will, when exposed to heat and or to a flame, in due course catch fire. This is something that would certainly be very well known by anyone in the construction industry who is involved with the specification, purchase, fabrication or use of cladding or cladding systems. So that's Mr. Verler's evidence. Now, I think you told us this morning, is this right, that when you began working for Arconic, you didn't know that PE was combustible and when exposed to heat or flame would catch fire. Is that correct?
That was never explained to me when I started with the company. As far as I was concerned, it was a standard core. I would have questioned it at that early stage, asking to why we manufactured this product if it was at all combustible in that way. So That was my understanding. It was just the standard PE with amount of plastic in the core, but nothing was ever put to me like that when I started the company.
I see. So Mr. Verla didn't say anything like this to you when you started at the company. Were you ever told something like this by anyone else at Arconic prior to the Grenfell fire?
No one has ever spoken to me about the flame and it will catch fire in a fire. It had an amount of plastic in it, so you assume later on, which I did when you get speaking to contractors and mainly fabricators that know their business inside out, would say that it can't be a plastic core and it has to be an FR because it's been specified. But that's as far as I was ever told.
I see.
I was never told them in that words, no.
Do you ever recall Mr. Verla or anyone else at Arconic telling you about how long it took for Rainabond PE to catch fire in the event of a fire event?
No, I can't recall ever being told that.
Were you ever told about its performance in fire once a fire had begun within the panels?
No, I was never told that.
Did you ever learn anything about the effect that different fixing methods, so for example, the difference between a rivet and a cassette, might have on the fire performance of Rainabond ACM panels with a PE core?
I can't recall ever being told that personally, no. I don't remember. I may have heard it somewhere, but I honestly can't remember anyone telling me on a one-to-one basis that this is the case.
When you say you may have heard it somewhere, do you mean you might have heard it somewhere within the company or external to the company?
Oh, well, it could well have been external to the company. I can't, or it may have been at the company. It's been too long ago for me to remember exactly. But
I see.
no, I'm sorry, I can't answer that in honest.
So just so we're clear, you're saying that you didn't know there was a difference between how the rivet performed and how the cassette PE panels performed?
I don't honestly believe that anyone's told me that they perform differently in a fire.
Now, we've already seen that in your training, and you've told us that you learned that there was an FR version of Rainabond. What were you told about that FR core version? Were you given any details about it?
I was told that it was a fire retardant product that was used within the core, but that's as far really as that I was told. And obviously the competitors were using that product at the time, but that's about it really.
Were you told about what the core actually comprised of?
It's probably in writing or in some literature somewhere, but no, I can't recall ever being told of what the build-up of the product was.
So you didn't know that it was a 70% mineral fibre and 30% thermoplastic?
I do now, but I didn't at that time, no.
And at that time, are you talking about your induction, or are you talking about any time when you were selling Rainabond before?
Sorry, yeah, I'm talking about the induction when I first started with the company. You know, I didn't really know the difference between the two cores at all.
And they didn't help you with that?
No, one was fire retardant and one was a standard core.
Were you not curious as to precisely what the FR core comprised of and wanted to know so you could sell it to your customers?
Well, looking back on it, I knew the two cores were different. I knew one was slightly cheaper than the other one. And I honestly believed that it may have been down to the client's budget of some type. Early on, I'm talking when I started with the company, to make that quite clear, because I was quite naive and new to the company, not realising what the two were. I mean, I knew that one was a fire retardant because it's FR. I knew the PE was a standard core, and I knew it standard for polyethylene. But that was as far as it went.
Were you told that there was a difference in the type of applications that the two cores could be used for?
No, as far as I was concerned, the two cores could be used in the same application.
So did you think, were you told that both cores could be used on a high-rise building?
I was at that time told, I don't think the conversation came up about high-rise buildings when I first started with the company, and what product to use and what not product to use. I learned that myself later on down the line, so I wasn't specifically told by anybody at Arconic on the technical team not to use a PE at certain heights.
I see. And you say you learned that yourself later on down the line. When did you learn that?
Well, I think I learned it talking to fabricators, main contractors, and of course reading through the literature as it goes on, and knowing that that you use the FR on most applications, and that was my main remit, was to sell the FR product. I mean, we were told to for Alan Flacon, when he was the managing director, was to focus on all of our efforts on FR, and because that's the way it was at the time. But I didn't really think of any difference.
I see. And when were you told by Alan Flacon that you were to focus on selling the FR product? That
would have been at sales meets. When we had the sales meets, it was like, we really do want to progress with the FR sales, and promote that, and it's in the market dictated that that's what was being used, the FR product, and that's what was being specified. So really, it was more or less selling itself, to be honest.
Were you ever told in terms not to sell the PE product, or at least not to sell it for certain applications?
No, I wasn't, no.
Did there come a time when you appreciated that the PE core ought not to be used for tall buildings?
Yes, there was. The time was obviously after the Grenfell fire, and probably a year running up to the Grenfell fire, the tragedy. That the PE wasn't being specified for buildings at certain heights. So the only specification I was putting forward would have been the FR, or the A2 that I'm sure we'll come to at some stage, that we were trying to manufacture and break into the market with.
Is it your evidence that you knew for the year running up to the Grenfell fire that PE should not be specified for tall buildings because it was dangerous to do so?
That was my understanding, that people weren't specifying the PE product on tall buildings. Yes.
And did you ever have a conversation with Claude Verler and his team about that at the time?
I can't recall ever having a conversation with Claude Verler or the team about specifying PE on high-rise buildings or anything over a certain height. It probably would have been mentioned maybe at a sales meeting, but that was the standard practice at that time. It was running up. Everybody was specifying an FR product, so that's what was being put through to the market.
Was it a more general conversation without reference to tall buildings that PE shouldn't be specified at all on architectural projects because it was dangerous?
I think it was probably a general sort of conversation along the lines, but I was dictated to by an awful lot with the fabricators that would specify, or the architect would specify, or, that's the product that needs to be used on these buildings. So that's what was being put forward.
I appreciate you say that you were being pushed in that direction by effectively your clients, your fabricators, and those that were specifying. But what were the messages you were getting from Merxheim in France about the use of PE in architecture and its safety?
Well, I guess we were being, as I said before, we were trying to promote and focus on the FR product. And that was something that we were very keen to do. but yeah, there was no real conversations over what not to put on a building and what to put on a building, if that makes any sense. If you excuse me. Yeah.
Were you told why you had to focus on selling the FR product by Merxheim?
I think we were told that's the way the market was going. That was the trend. I mean, everybody was using FR materials. Our competitors were majority of them were using FR material. So we were just focused on that. I know we were manufacturing in it, and we really wanted to sort of make a dent in the market, if you like, by using FR.
Was that specifically because people were aware at that point that it was not safe to use PE on architectural projects?
So are you talking about the people in Merxheim?
Yes.
In Merxheim? I'm not 100% sure on that. I don't know. I can't answer your question on that, because we were just told that the FR product is the one that needs to be in the forefront, really. But no one was ever mentioned anymore.
And what did you actually do to focus on the FR product? Did you only offer FR? What steps did you take to implement that direction?
I think, it was, as I said before, that the market dictates to me. I'm not sure how it works in other industries, but I would be asked for these products, or I would see if I was working on a building and it was a certain height, or the building warranted a fire retardant product, then that's the product that I would specify and put forward. But it doesn't always work like that, because there are obviously fabricators and alike that will order the material without me knowing what the building was, what height it was, or what the building consists of. So that was entirely out of my hands. They would purchase it direct through France.
I see. And did that ever prompt a conversation between you and anyone at Merxheim about the status of existing projects where PE was being used?
It's a very difficult question to answer for me, because a lot of the projects that were specified or spoke about weren't necessarily the projects' names that they're given, because fabricators are they like to keep their projects close to their hearts, and they won't tell you exactly what it is, because they're worried that the specification or the project will get out and it will be priced elsewhere. So I can only answer on my side of things, and that would be, none of the questions really were asked about what were in the pipeline and what projects were there and weren't there. So
I see. You've just explained about what was happening with the fabricators and what you were aware of through them. I'm asking about Merxheim. Did you ever have a conversation with someone at Merxheim about the fact that PE was being used on existing projects, and about the safety of that?
No, I understand. Sorry, I misunderstood your question. No, the answer to that question, no, I can't recall having a conversation. I just can't remember having a conversation with anybody at Merxheim about that.
If we can look back again at paragraph 32.2 of your statement on page 11. Right, page 11 of your statement, yes. So we looked at 32.1 before, but just looking at 32.2 below that, you say none of the ACM with an FR core was considered non-combustible or of limited combustibility. Do you see that there?
Yes, I can see that, yeah.
So what was your understanding of how you could categorize the FR core from a combustibility point of view? If it wasn't non-combustible or of limited combustibility, what was your understanding about what it was?
In my terms, I would say the FR product would have been a product that didn't catch fire. Does that make sense?
well, if that's your evidence, were you told anything more specific about the fire performance of the FR product during your induction and training for Arconic?
No, I can't recall I was.
So were you ever aware that the FR core met certain classifications, either national or, for example, European?
I recall that there was a, yes, I was aware.
And what standards did it meet, the FR core, as far as you were told by Merksheim?
Well, I assume it was, from what I understood, it was a spread of flame, a zero rate. Does that make, do you understand if I said that?
Are you saying it was national class naught, the FR?
Yes.
Right, that was your understanding, was it?
That was my understanding, yes.
I see. Now, Mr. Verler gives some evidence about the training that was delivered by Merksheim in his witness statement. If we can look at that, it's at MET 30/53190 at page 36. And I want to look at paragraph 124. So this is Mr. Verler's witness statement. He says, I've also been asked to confirm whether Arconic provides training to its staff and contractors in relation to the technical performance of its products, including in respect of fire performance. In relation to Arconic employees and external sales teams, this training occurs in different forms, but includes information on technical matters being provided to relevant employees as part of their onboarding process. This is usually at least a half-day session, and the content will depend upon the particular role of the employee. For example, if they were responsible for sales into France, there may be a greater focus on French-related technical certifications. Do you see that there? Now, do you remember undergoing a half-day session with Mr. Verler and his team as part of the induction process?
I can remember some time, yes, it could have been a half-day training period, vaguely.
And is he right that that half-day session for you had a greater focus on UK-related technical certifications?
I can't honestly say that it was related to the UK performance, no.
So does that mean you don't think it did that, or you just have no recollection?
I really have no recollection of him ever talking about the regulations for the UK, no.
So you don't think he said anything to you about the UK regulatory regime, yes?
I can't remember him. Yeah, I just can't remember that conversation. Or there was some training, obviously half-a-day training, but I can't remember. I'm ever so sorry, I can't remember that far, but I can't remember that being said.
And what about particular certifications that were held by the Reynabon product range, which were relevant to the UK market? Were you told about that?
Again, I really can't recall. I can't remember things being mentioned about the UK.
Did you receive any briefing on any BBA certificates at this time?
Sorry, are we talking about my induction course, aren't we? No, there was nothing mentioned about the BBA at my induction course.
So were you unaware throughout your induction that there was a BBA certificate that was relevant to the Reynabon architectural wall panels?
There was a BBA certificate that was in the literature, but certainly I was aware there was one, but there was no discussion, in-depth discussion about it, no.
And you were aware based on your own knowledge and your own research, or you were told that by Merksheim that there was this BBA certificate in existence?
It would have been in the literature pack, and there would have been a BBA certificate of some type there, if I remember that far back. So I would have seen the BBA kite mark but that would have been as far as it went, really.
You talked there about the literature pack. What was the literature pack?
It would have been some brochures. Again, just bear with me, sorry, I'm trying to think back and rack my brain on what the literature pack would have been. It would have been some brochures on the products, and as I say, the BBA certification may have been in there. I remember seeing a BBA document, but just basic information about the products, really, and the literature brochures.
And was that a physical hard copy pack you were provided with, or was it some kind of electronic batch of information?
It would have been a hard, if I remember, a binder. Yeah, so it would have been in a binder.
I see. Were you told about that there was a difference between the building regulations regimes in England and Wales as between that and Scotland?
No, I can't recall ever being told the differences about the two or three.
I see. Let's look at page 14 of your witness statement now, and paragraph 42. So it's at the bottom of that page. I just want to look at what you say in the first 4 lines. You say, prior to the Grenfell Tower fire, my level of knowledge about matters such as the UK building regulations, approved documents and industry guidance in relation to fire performance matters was limited, which is not surprising in circumstances where my role is purely a sales role. Was any part of your training or induction directed at the building regulations or the practical guidance in the approved documents?
I really can't recall anything being mentioned. So the answer would have to be, I'm sorry, I can't remember, but it's very doubtful. I don't think it was.
Did you know about the existence of approved document B on fire safety between 2015 and 2017 while you worked in your role as UK sales manager?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
Yeah, did you know about the existence of approved document B on fire safety between 2015 and June 2017?
No, I can honestly say I didn't look into any regulations where it comes to that. No.
So you didn't even know there was something called approved document B on fire safety? You didn't know that? I
would have heard of the document, but I haven't read it, and I can't tell you the in-depth wording of it because I knew it was there, but the contents of it, I can't recite to you. I can't tell you.
During your training, were you made aware that there was stricter guidance about cladding materials for use on high-rise buildings?
I'm sorry, I'm trying to think again. Just bear with me if I pause, because I'm drastically trying to think back to them times, and I can't recall. We knew that there was regulations at a certain height, but I can't recall what date that would have been or what year it would have been. So I'm sorry, I can't remember if that was ever mentioned.
Did you know at any time that there was special guidance within ADB, approved document B, about high-rise buildings and the types of cladding materials that could be used over 18 metres?
At any time?
Yeah.
Yeah. I knew that, obviously, as I mentioned before, that we couldn't use a certain product over the 18 metres. But I can't recite the document. I wouldn't be able to tell you what the document actually meant.
So you were never curious enough to see what that guidance said about what you could and couldn't use over 18 metres?
It's easy for me to say this, but we had a technical team, and the technical team were the ones that would have told me if there are any issues with the BBA certificate, or if there are any things we could or couldn't do with the material. So I relied on them to give me up-to-date information on anything that we needed to know.
But as a salesperson and a sales representative of these panels in the UK, didn't you need to know and have at least a basic understanding of the circumstances in which panels could be used on tall buildings?
I agree. I think I had a knowledge of what, as I said to you before, what product could be used over 18 meters and what couldn't. And the FR product was being used over an 18 meter. But apart from fire performance, I can honestly say the question, I've never been confronted by anybody to say, look, you can't use these on this product, on this project, or this isn't acceptable in this market. So I assumed, which we shouldn't do, that everything was A-OK with the product, and the product was perfectly suitable to be used in the conditions that I was specifying it.
Did you know that both national and European classifications were both relevant to the use of Railabond panels in the UK?
No, I'm afraid I didn't.
So you didn't know that the practical guidance on fire safety cites both national classifications and European classifications? You didn't know that?
These were set out in a document of what kind? Are we talking about the BBA certification?
Well, that does it. That has both European and national classifications.
I said I was aware that they were a document and they were there in the document, but I never really digested the document.
But were you aware in more general guidance around the building regulations that it was referring to both national and European classifications?
I'm afraid I wasn't, if I'm honest.
Did you understand that the European classifications were relevant to the UK market?
Yeah, no, I can't honestly say I did.
So what classifications did you think were relevant to whether or not panels could be used in the UK?
As I mentioned before, the BBA certification was a document that I thought was good enough for our material to go on, and assumed that everything in that document was good enough for us to use our materials within the UK market.
We'll come to look at it in a little bit of detail later. I'm going to take you to the BBA certificate, but did you ever read it yourself?
I've got to be honest, absolutely honest with you, I glanced over it, I saw the BBA certificate, but I was reliant on the technical team in France to tell me that everything within that BBA certificate was okay. If it had ever been brought up that this wasn't a document that was any good to us and we couldn't use it for whatever reason, then I would have looked into it a lot more, but I didn't. I assumed that document was a document that was okay for me to present in the UK.
I see. Were you ever made aware by Merksheim that there'd been changes to certain fire classifications of certain products?
I can't recall, no.
Do you recall there being any particular emphasis in your training on the UK regulatory requirements?
Not in my training. I can't recall that this was ever discussed with the UK, no.
So thinking back to what Mr. Verler said, we just looked at it, where he said there would be particular emphasis in the training on whichever regulatory regime was relevant to that person. Is it your evidence that in your case that didn't happen?
I can honestly say that I don't recall him ever talking to me about the UK regulations, what can be done, what can't be done. I can't obviously talk for other people that he may have trained, but in my case, I don't recall that.
did he ever say to you in general terms that the UK regulations were weak or soft around the use of Rainabon panels?
No, that conversation never happened. No, I never remember ever saying that.
I see. So you don't remember being given any information during your training about the technical requirements for UK sales in this country?
No, I don't recall ever getting trained on UK regulations.
Okay. Can we just look at, I want to look at a document from 2014 now. I appreciate this is before your time at Arconic. We can go to MET 30/53158, and then it's underscore P07 at page 33. It's MET 30/53158 underscore P07, page 33. So this is would appear to be some slides from a sales meeting. It's a Rainabon and Raino-Lux sales meeting, January 2014, and it's called Technical Assistance. Now, I appreciate this is more than a year before you started at Arconic, but I want to ask you just about a couple of passages in here, see if you can help us. If we go on to page 36 in this presentation. If we look at the bottom of that page, or the second half of that page, we can see that it says, second paragraph up, it says this: please, the person in charge of a country and or market has to check the certifications and qualifications needed to sale. Do you see that there?
I can see that, yes.
Now, so that appears to be a message to whoever was in charge of a country or market to check the certifications and qualifications needed to make sales. Now, was that a message ever given to you, either during your induction and initial training or later by Merksheim?
I can't recall there ever being a message like that being given to me. And obviously I can't comment on that document. It's the first time I've seen that document. It's before my time, as you're aware. So I can't recall ever seeing a document with that wording, I'm afraid, sorry.
I appreciate you haven't seen a document with that wording, but more generally, was that message ever conveyed to you by those at Merksheim, that they were reliant on you to be looking out for relevant certifications in the jurisdiction that you were operating in?
Certainly not, because if it had have been, then it would have been a different scenario and I would have been looking out for that, for sure.
So your evidence is that you simply didn't have your eye on that at all, no?
Well, not at all. I just wasn't given that message. No one ever asked me that or told me, we'd like you to do that. So no, there was never that sort of conversation with anybody.
Did that ever feel uncomfortable, selling a product into a market where you were wholly unaware of what the regulatory regime was around that product?
I again assumed that the technical team had provided me with everything that I needed for the UK market, building regulations and everything was okay to present to the UK market, and there were no changes ever told to me throughout my employment, you know, that this you can't use this or you shouldn't be doing this. So I relied quite heavily on the technical team to tell me these things.
Here, your technical team is based in France. Did it not ever occur to you that being located in the market, operating in it on a day-to-day basis, that you might actually be in a good position to make sure that the products were being sold appropriately and in accordance with the relevant regulatory regime in the UK? It
didn't occur to me. The conversation had never come up with any of my fabricators or any of the people that I were working quite closely with that would have known about these these issues. So nothing was pursued. No, it didn't occur to me.
I see. Let's go back. Can we go back to that presentation and look at the same slide we just had up on the screen? So it's page 36 of the presentation. The last kind of bullet on this page says this: impossible for a project, but check and ask in order to anticipate. Now, it appears that what that's encouraging you to do, or possibly encouraging you to do, is to check what the certifications and qualifications might be needed for particular projects. Again, is that a message that was ever conveyed to you?
No, not that I can recall, no.
Now, did your understanding of the relevant regulatory regime in the UK change during the period May 2015 through to June 2017? Did you ever gain a greater understanding of what the relevant regime was in the UK?
Yes, with the knowledge of the experts and people that I was working with, that did change over time, yes.
And can you help us as to what in particular changed? What did you become more aware of as time went on about the regulatory requirements in the UK?
I guess the 18-metre height of a building, as we mentioned before, that was quite clear that you weren't to use certain products over that height. And yeah, that's about it, really.
And how quickly did you become aware of that it was quite clear that you were not to use certain products over 18 metres?
When it was, we were in conversations with various different fabricators, architects, developers, everybody that I worked with, sort of, we were speaking about it on a regular basis, so we knew that that was the case.
Would you say that you would have known that that was the case by the end of 2015, having started in the role in mid-2015?
Probably not, no. If I'm honest, I started quite naive where it comes to regulations. Nothing was explained to me about them, so I was still in my training, visiting fabricators and getting to know the UK market really right the way until the end of 2015, so not necessarily, no.
But by the end of 2016, would you say you did have that clear understanding about?
My knowledge was getting better, yes, by the end of 2016 of the markets.
And by the end of 2016, were you clear that you couldn't use certain products over 18 metres?
That was pretty much so. Yeah, it was being spoken about quite a lot. So the conversations would come up quite regularly, yes.
And did you ever then relay those conversations back to Merksheim and say, by the way, the mood music here is that we can't use certain products over 18 metres? Did you communicate that back? Sorry.
Sorry, it's me butting in. Sorry, I do apologise. No, that would have been, they would have known, that would have been the knowledge for sure. By the end of 2017, I know Claude Verley and the team would have known that products should never have been used over a certain height, because if I was aware of it in the UK, it would have been mentioned and he would have certainly have had that knowledge.
Did you mean to say 2017 just then, or did you mean 2016?
Sorry, 2017, yeah. By the end of 2017, I would assume he would have known that everything would have been regulations would have been over 18 by then.
You've said that by the end of 2016, you were clear that you couldn't use certain products over 18 metres. Was that also Merksheim's understanding?
I can't be certain that they would have known that by the end of 16, but as time went on, they definitely would have been aware of it.
Is that just an assumption you're making, or is that based on conversations or exchanges you actually had with?
It would have been a conversation that I would have had with France in the technical team at some stage. I can't recall exactly when, what date, but I would have mentioned the over 18 metre situation, and they would have been aware of it. Yeah.
Let's look at page 15 of your witness statement now. This is paragraph 43. And I just want to look at around the first 9 lines of what you say in this paragraph. So you say, I do need to understand some of the terminology used in the industry in order to be able to speak the English industry language. And I was, of course, aware, for example, that a product with an A2 core or an FR core would have a better fire performance rating than an equivalent product with a PE core, but I was not aware of and was not involved in the technical detail behind that. From a sales perspective, I was aware that it was important to have a class 0 rating for panels in terms of what I understood related to the potential spread of flame on the surface of panels, but that's as far as my knowledge went. And in the case of ACM, the surfaces are all the same, i.e. aluminium, and therefore it was no surprise to me to understand that the Rainabond product had that class 0 rating, whether that was for a PE, FR, or A2 core. Now, just pausing there, you said in the first couple of lines that it was important that you did have some of the terminology used in the industry in order to be able to speak the language. On fire performance, can you help us with what that terminology would have consisted of?
I'm sorry, can you in fire performance, I don't understand.
Yeah, what terminology would you have felt comfortable using about fire performance in your role as sales manager in the UK?
As I mentioned, it would have been a class O or class 0 spread of flame, and that's probably as far as it would have gone. And the FR product being a fire retardant product, but that's as far as it would have gone.
I see. I mean, you say there that you talk about the different core performances, and you say that you were, of course, aware that there were differences in fire performance between the PE and the FR cores. How did you become aware of that?
As we mentioned before, earlier on, it would have been through, talking to the fabricators and the people I dealt with on a daily basis. As time went on, I become more and more aware of the differences in the core. But that was self-taught, if you like, because I came into the industry with very little knowledge about the PE, FR, A2, or whatever core it was at the time. So my knowledge was very limited in 2015, all the way through till 2016. I learned this through talks with fabricators in the UK and specifiers, and they told me a bit about where we were with FR and PE. But that's as far as my knowledge sort of went.
Did you ever seek to verify that with your superiors or with the technical team at Merxheim, this knowledge that you were gaining about the different fire performance between FR and PE cores? My understanding was that the technical team understood that, and they knew that. They knew the difference, obviously, between a PE and an FR core and an A2 core, because they're technical. It was just on a personal level. I was learning this through a second source, through my fabricators and my customers. So I didn't feel the need to relay that back to France in any way, because I assume they already understood and they knew what they should have done, their technical team. So how did you become aware of the class 0 requirement? Where did that come from?
That was on the BBA certificate, so I'm aware of that.
But did anyone at Merksheim talk to you about what that meant, what the significance of it was, what test it had undergone to get that?
No, I can honestly say that was never taught me or explained to me how we came about getting that test or that certificate. It was just there in writing on the BBA.
Why was it no surprise to you? This is what you've just said in your statement that we just read. Why was it no surprise to you to understand that the Rainabon product had a Class 0 rating, whether that was for the PE, FR or A2 core?
Being the company they are, I mean, Arconic are a huge organisation. They'd been going for many years, 30 years in the industry. They would have been the basic sort of thing that you would assume that they would have. So it was no surprise to me that we had the Class O rating.
How did you know that Class 0 was the basic rating? Where did that knowledge come from?
Oh, sorry, I mentioned the basic. That's just something that I knew that was on the BBA certificate, and that is spread of flame. It's what it is. You know, that's what it's.
What do you mean when you say that's just spread of flame? That's what it is.
Sorry, it's coming across a bit sort of not quite clear. I've seen it in the document. I've read it in the document, and I assumed that a company like Arconic would have that as a standard certification in the BBA.
If we just look back at what you've said in your statement, paragraph 43, page 15. You say, if we pick it up, 1, 2, 3, 5 lines down, you say, from a pet sales perspective, I was aware it was important to have Class 0 rating. And then a little bit further on, you say, that's as far as my knowledge went. And then you say this, in the case of ACM, the surfaces are all the same, i.e. aluminium, and therefore it was no surprise to me to understand that the Rainabon product had that Class 0 rating. So it does appear from that you know a little bit more about testing than you're saying, because you're saying that you knew from the fact that the surfaces were all the same, that meant there was no surprise about all those products having Class 0. Is that right?
What I mean by that is the aluminium surface would be a spread of flame to a certain extent because it is an aluminium surface. Yeah, maybe my wording's not fantastic, but that's as far as I knew.
So you knew that the Class 0 test, what your understanding was, it was a surface spread of flame test, yes?
That was my understanding, yeah, that it was a surface spread of flame test. And yeah.
And did you learn that from somebody within Arconic, or did you learn that from somebody else?
I think I learned that from somebody else along the line. There was no reason for anybody to discuss that later on with me. I think I picked that up off of a customer along the line somewhere, yeah.
Was there anything said about Class 0 in your training?
I'm sorry, I can't recall. I can't think that far back, so I really don't know. I don't think so, no.
Did you ever tell your customers that Rainabon panels had a Class 0 rating, regardless of the core?
No, I don't recall ever speaking to any of my customers about a Class O rating. They generally would ask the question if they needed to know it, but I never had that conversation with them unless I was asked. So no, I don't remember having a conversation.
So if they asked the question, if they'd asked the question, do all your panels, all your Rainabon panels have Class 0, what would the answer have been that you would have given?
At that time, depending on what year we're talking, at the early stages of my employment or later on in my employment. Sorry.
Can you help us? What answer would you have given at the early stages of your employment?
The early stages of my employment, I probably wouldn't have been able to answer the question, and it would have been, it's in the BBA document, and I would have asked the technical team to clarify or answer their question for them.
And did your knowledge about Class Naught ever change between then and the Grenfell Tower fire?
Between then and the Grenfell Tower fire, I've gained a lot more knowledge, yes, down the line.
And what have you learned about Class Naught and the Rainabond products in that time?
I think the Rainabond product hasn't got a Class Naught, and we know that for the PE. So that no longer exists. Yeah, that's as far as I know.
When did you come to be aware of that the Rainabond product didn't have Class Naught for the PE?
I can't recall an exact date. I mean, I would just be guessing, and I don't want to do that. I'm not sure of the year, but along the line, I would have certainly have known of it.
Can you help? Was that pre-fire? Was that pre the Grenfell Tower fire that you became aware that the Rainabond PE product did not have the Class Naught?
No, that would be after the fire.
What was it about the aluminium surface that told you that it would be Class Naught?
Because it's a metal, two pieces of metal, you assume that the spread of flame would literally spread across the metal. So that's how I become aware of that. I mean, it's very crude the way I'm trying to explain it, but in my mind, that was the reason for it, the spread of flame.
And did anyone within Arconic ever explain that to you?
No, nobody's explained that to me in Arconic.
What was your understanding of what Class Naught meant in terms of its use on buildings? What was the significance of the material having Class Naught?
Well, it was purely a regulation. It was purely a document that needed to be had to be able to sell the product within the UK.
Did you think that if it had Class Naught, you could use it on any building in the UK?
I can't answer that question. I'm sorry. I assume. I don't know. I can't answer that question.
As we just read in your statement, you said that Class Naught was important from a sales perspective, yes?
Yes.
So did the label Class Naught positively assist you to make sales?
I think the BBA certificate was asked for on several occasions, and if we didn't have a BBA certification, then the sale probably wouldn't have gone forward, because it's something that, you know, the kite mark in the UK is something that people take as a security blanket sometimes, and yes, it did help with selling the product in the UK for sure.
Were you ever made aware? And I want to focus on the time pre-fire at the moment. Were you ever made aware that there was no test report supporting Rainabond 55 PE's classification as Class Naught?
I can't remember ever being. No, I can't remember ever being told this. I can't remember. I'm sorry.
So does it follow that for the entire time, 2015, 2016, and up to June 2017, you understood that there were test reports supporting Rainabond 55 PE's classification as National Class Naught?
Well, yes, I thought that was kosher. We did have it.
Now, you also mentioned the Euroclass system in the paragraph that we've just read. What did you know about that European classification system?
I didn't know an awful lot about the European classification, because I didn't really need, at the early stages of my employment, to know much about that. So no, I don't know an awful lot.
Was European classification covered at all in your induction or training?
Not European, no, it wouldn't have been, no.
No, so Claude Verler's technical team They didn't tell you anything about the European classification system and the significance of classifications under it?
I can't honestly remember them talking to me about that, the European classification, no.
Were you briefed on what classifications the Rainabond product had under that European classification system?
I just can't remember ever having this conversation or ever being told anything about the European classification.
Did you subsequently come to learn about that European classification system while performing your role?
I got to know more about it, yeah, but I didn't know the ins and outs of the European classification, no.
Did you know in very general terms that the classifications went from broadly A1 down to F? Did you know there were these letters under
Vaguely, yes, I knew the letters, yeah, were there.
And did you know that A and B were at the top end, the better end of the scale, and E and F were at the worse end of the scale in terms of fire performance?
To a certain extent, I sort of knew that these letters meant something, and I assumed that A was the better and F would have been the not so good.
If you'd seen something that said BS1 D0, would you have known what the S and the D were referring to?
No, I'd be guessing. No, I don't know exactly what they stand for.
You've mentioned in your statement, we just looked at it, and you mentioned a number of times the A2 core. You've mentioned it already in your evidence today. Did you appreciate that this was a reference to the European classification A2?
I didn't know we didn't have an A2 and haven't had an A2 in the UK, so no, I didn't.
I see. But it's right, isn't it, that before or around the time of the fire, A2 was being talked about more and more. Is that not right?
A2 was, yes, and I knew it as A2, yes, an A2 product.
But you didn't know that by referring to it as an A2 product, that was a reference to the European classification system?
No, I didn't.
When you started at Arconic, were you made aware that different fixing systems, cassette and rivet, had different European classifications?
Was I trained in it? Are you asking me what was I trained in this field? Was I told about these different classifications at the beginning of my employment? The answer to that would have been no. I can't recall ever being told about any of this when I started.
When you started at Arconic, the classification for Rainabond PE rivet fix was a C, and the classification for a Rainabond PE cassette fix was an E. Were you made aware of those during your training?
No, I wasn't, no.
Were you subsequently made aware of those classifications by anyone else at Arconic?
No, I wasn't, no.
Prior to the Grenfell Tower fire, were you aware that the Rainabond PE rivet was a C and the PE cassette was an E?
I wasn't aware and I wasn't told, I'm afraid, no, sorry.
So just to be absolutely clear, you say in your statement that the Rainabond PE, FR and A2 panels, you thought they were class 0. But it's right, is it, that you weren't aware that those cores achieve very different fire performances under the European classification system?
That's correct, yes.
You're never told that by anybody at Merksheim, is that your evidence?
I can't recall anybody and the technical team ever discussing this with me, no.
And is it right that those different cores were priced differently?
They were, yes.
And based on your understanding, were they priced differently because they behaved differently in fire? Why were they priced differently?
my understanding was that the standard core that we'd had was a standard core with a certain amount of plastic in it. And the FR core was a fire retardant core that was a new product that had been sort of manufactured, and the manufacturing process was more costly, so the cost of that product would be slightly more expensive.
And when you say slightly more expensive, in your time as sales representative, what was the price differential on average between the PR and the FR cord Rainabond?
So the PE or the EFR, did you say?
Yeah, what was the price differential between the two of them?
Yeah, I would say that there was a good £2 difference square metre between the two, the PE and FR. Excuse me.
Yeah. Looking again at your witness statement, if we can look now at page 15, paragraph 45. And here, it's at the very bottom of that page, you say this: I do not remember ever knowingly recommending Rainabond PE as suitable for use above 18 metres. And I do not know if Arconic ever obtained professional advice or guidance from an external body relating to the suitability of Rainabond PE for use above 18 metres in the UK. So that's the evidence you give there. I just want to ask you some questions about that. Are you saying there that you didn't recommend Rainabond with a PE core for use above 18 metres because you knew it was unsuitable in that application?
That's correct. If I would never have recommended a PE over an 18-metre building.
So your evidence is it that you would never have recommended PE for an over 18-metre building, yes?
Not knowingly recommended over an 18-metre building, i.e. if someone had come to me and asked me, I've got this building, it's over 18 metres, Vince, would you recommend putting a PE core on the building? The answer would have been no. If there had been a fabricator or a customer would have phoned into France and ordered the material for a project that I was unaware of in PE that was over 18 metres, and I didn't have I didn't have any knowledge of that, then that would have been a different thing, because that often happened where I would be, if you like, played off with the internal staff, and me being an external guy in the UK, they would phone up France and place an order for some material for a project that I was unaware of. So if it was out of my control, there wasn't a lot I could really do about that.
I see. So just going back to your answer where you said you would never have recommended PE for a building that you knew was over 18 metres, was that right from the outset of your work as UK sales representative? Or was that a practice that came at a particular point in time?
That was a practice later on, as I say, later on in my career. At the beginning of my employment, then I probably wouldn't have known the difference. I know I wouldn't have known the difference, and I wouldn't have not recommended it over 18 metres, because I didn't know the difference between the two, really.
And why did your practice change so that you wouldn't have recommended it for buildings that you knew were over 18 metres at a later stage? Why did you change?
I think, as I said before, it would have been dictated to me in specifications, and also, talking to architects and fabricators and contractors. They weren't specifying projects over 18 metres with anything but a fire retardant product or an A2 product. So, speaking to the likes of Sotec, one of my fabricators that very clocked on within the industry, would have made it quite clear that they wouldn't be ordering any materials through me if it was PE, and if it was over a certain height, it had to be the right specification. So,
and just so we're absolutely clear, that was something that was dictated to you by your customers downstream, and not something that was said to you by anyone else at Arconic. Is that right?
I can't recall having a conversation with anybody at Arconic about the over 18 meters. I would have explained to them in the UK that's what's happening. You know, the over 18 meter rule. But I honestly, if I'm wrong, I can't recall anybody from technical explaining to me that we shouldn't be using materials over a certain height. It was just something that I would have explained or they would have picked up along the line, but nobody actually sat me down and spoke to me about this. I already knew about it because that's what was happening with specifications in the UK.
I see. Mr. Chairman, I think that might be an appropriate moment for the afternoon break, if that's okay.
Yes, that sounds sensible. Mr. Meakins, we'll have a short break at this point. We'll come back, please, at 25 to 4. And let me just remind you, please, not to talk to anyone about your evidence or anything to do with it during the break. All right?
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
We'll see you at 25 to 4.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Welcome back, everyone. Mr. Meakins, are you there?
Sir? Yes, sir, here.
Yeah, you can see me and hear me. That's good. And you're ready to carry on?
I think so, yes. Yes,
Very
thanks.
good. All right. Yes, Ms. Grange, when you're ready then.
Yes, thank you. I've just got some questions now about your understanding of the UK marketplace. We heard evidence from Deborah French that there was a widespread understanding within Arconic that the UK was a PE market. Now, was that your understanding when you started working for Arconic?
No, it wasn't. No, my understanding was, remembering that when I started, we had a big focus on FR as well as PE. So it was pretty much 50-50, I would say, when I first started.
And was that something that was communicated to you in your induction and training, that the UK was a 50-50 market as between PE and FR?
No, that was my findings in the marketplace, the UK marketplace, working with different fabricators. So when I started, my program was to bring on more fabricators, because we only ever worked, when Deborah was working with with Arconic or Arcoa at the time, as you're aware, with a few fabricators, handful. I was looking at bringing 5 or 6 or maybe 7 fabricators into the UK market so we could work with more fabricators and grow the market. So the feedback from them was, they were using FR as well as PE. So it wasn't dominated by PE when I'd started, when I was speaking to more customers.
I see. Ms. French also told us that she would automatically specify PE called ACM when supplying to her customers in the UK, that was the default position. Was that your default position when you began working for Arconic?
When I began working for Arconic, for the first 6 months, because the area was vacant for 6 months to me prior starting, 6 to 8 months, customers would ring into France and place their orders via France, the internal sales team. So I didn't have a lot of communication where it comes to orders with customers until into sort of 2016. And then I was finding that more and more people were using FR and PE, so I wouldn't necessarily, put forward the PE, because that was a standard material that was classed as standard. That's the term we used if people were to order via the office and they didn't specify that they needed a fire retardant material, then they would order our standard material, which as PE. So I would look at the specification, look to see what the building was, if I was talking to an architect, and then specify what I thought would be the correct material, depending on what the building was. So it was pretty much a 50-50 thing, but we were focusing on more and more FR as my employment went on.
I see. So if a client was silent on the type of core and just said, I want Rainabond ACM in, let's say, early 2016, I think what you've just told us is that you would just assume they wanted a PE core, yes?
No, sorry, I'll make myself clear. If I was face-to-face with a client and they were telling me about the project and they said, we have this project, Vince, we need to know, we want your standard material on this project, or they would say, we would like to order some ACM from you. And I'd seen the drawings, for instance, and I knew what the building was, then I would look at them and specify the correct material. I'm talking about 16, 17 here when I was talking to customers. My knowledge was better of the product. And I would specify the correct FR, if need be, or PE. They wouldn't just order it. They would ask me what they think should go on the building. And at that time, as you're aware, everything was steering towards the over 18 metre, the FR, and it was becoming more and more popular. So I would recommend that they were to use this. If they were to phone up and just order the material from France, and it wouldn't go through me at all, because that went on for a good 6 months to 8 months, well into my employment, because that's what people were used to doing, just phoning France and ordering material. They would just order a standard material, or they would say they need some ACM material, and we would take the order. From what I understand now, would just be our standard PE material, and there wouldn't necessarily be any questions asked. What the building was, what type of building, where it was going. They would just be given the materials via France. Is that clear? Sorry, so I'd have to be in front of the client before I would specify what needs to be specified.
Yes, I understand that. Yeah, that's very helpful. Just going back to the point you mentioned about if you were in front of the client and you had the details of the project and the type of building, you said you would make sure you specified the correct product. How would you make that assessment? What was the correct and what was the incorrect product? Well,
I would look at the drawings. So we would sit down, we would discuss the project, what the project was, what type of building the project was. If I'm with a specifier or an architect, I would then advise them that we have two products, which would have been the FR or the PE, and explain to them, they need to be using this because it's over 18 meters, for instance, on a certain project, or they can decide on what material they want to purchase. So yeah, I would just steer them as best I could in the right direction, and then they would make their decision, and that's how it would go.
I see. And how did you know to advise them that if it was over 18 meters, they needed the FR product?
As we spoke before, when that started to come into play, the over 18 meter rule, as we sort of keep mentioning it, it would be a fire retardant or an A2 product that generally would go at that level. So you would just assume that they would want that product anyway, because 9 times out of 10, an architect would be talking to a fabricator or a main contractor, and they would automatically know that that's the product that needed to be put onto that building. So they would specify that product, be it our material or an Alucobond or a Larson, whatever competitor may have been on that specification. They may have been talking to me about an alternative product, which would be our Redabond FR, and I would specify our equivalent to whatever was specified if I didn't specify that product myself. Sorry to go all around the houses, but that's generally how it would work.
I see. And this 18 meter rule that you're talking about, where did you understand that came from, and when did it come in?
The 18 meter rule came in later in my employment. Obviously, early on, I wouldn't have known the difference. As I said, when I first started to work with Arconic, I didn't know anything about the 18 meter rule because I knew very little about the products. But as it went on, I guess it would have been in sort of 2016, latter part of 2016, 17, just as a wild, rough guesstimate around them sort of areas. Then we would started to discuss different heights in buildings, if I was asked.
I see. So did you think there was some kind of new regulatory requirement that came in around 20?
I understood that it always sort of been there. I understood that this is the material that should be used at that height. So that's something that I mentioned before, that I was learning from fabricators and learning from the industry in a whole. They were saying, you need to use this material at this certain height, Vince, this is what needs to be done, and you need to specify this, and it can't be this material. I'd often get phone from a fabricator, and they would say to me, for instance, Vince, we'd love to use your material, but unfortunately it has to be an A2 material. It can't be FR or PE, so we can't go with your material. So I would lose projects because of that. And you would just then walk away from it because I knew I didn't have an A2 product to compete with the likes of Alucobond or I'm using Lucabond as an example, but there are other sort of manufacturers obviously of A2.
Yeah, I'm going to come to that in just a moment. Were you aware that there were other countries, Germany, for example, where the FR core was standard material?
I was aware, yes. I was only aware later on in my employment after talking to my colleague, Torsten. He's a German sales manager, and they never used any PE materials. It was only the FR material. That was early on in the employment as well. I found that that's the case in that country, that typical them sort of countries. They were using the FR and didn't know anything about the PE.
Did that ever prompt a conversation between you and anybody at Merksheim to say, well, why in these other countries are they only using FR? Why is PE even available for sale at all in the UK?
If I'm absolutely honest, no, it didn't. And looking back on it in hindsight, maybe I could have said something and said, well, why are we using the PE? I assumed that it was an old material that we'd been using for many, many years before I'd started. And we were getting rid of this material and dwindling it out and focusing more on the fire retardant FR material to keep up with the European market. But I didn't honestly think for an instant to sort of say, well, guys, why are we using this?
Yeah. Ms. French told us that the UK, as well as she said being predominantly a PE market, she said it was also predominantly a cassette market as opposed to a rivet market. Was that your experience as well?
I think, yeah, a lot of people that were designing on the architectural market would go for a cassette panel over a face fixed panel. However, because I was doing, as I mentioned before, the corporate identification and the architectural market, and in the end, by 2017, if you see the figures or you see what I was doing, I was focusing an awful lot more on the CID market. So that would have been a mixture of face fix and cassette, but mainly face fix. So mine was slightly different because I wasn't just in the architectural market. I was in the corporate identification market and the architectural market. So it was pretty much, I guess, 50-50 towards the end with me. But on the architectural market, for sure, it was mainly cassette panel.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, you've talked about your competitors, and is it fair to say that you were keeping a very close eye on what your competitors were doing during the time you were UK or sales manager?
On certain competitors, you would see specifications coming up with their name, to say that they're a Lucabond or they're Larsen or they're whoever they may be. So I wouldn't say a close eye, but I was aware of their products and aware of the projects that maybe they were getting involved in.
Yeah. Ms. French has given us a list of Arconic's competitors in the UK. Do you agree with this list, that it was a Lucabond manufactured by 3A?
Yes, the Lucabond was leading, yeah.
Alpolic, produced by Mitsubishi Chemicals?
Yes, they would have been, yeah, a competitor.
And then Alu Coil, produced by Larsen. I think you've just mentioned them. Is that right?
Larsen, yes.
Were they the main UK competitors?
They were, and then we started there was a stack bond, I think, was being introduced later on down the line, which were seemed to manufacture very cheaply, and they broke into the UK market. But no, I agree that they were the main competitors in the UK. Yeah.
Was it part of your role to report back to Merksheim about what your competitors were doing in the UK market? Was that part of the dialogue you had with them?
I think the sales team in Merksheim and the technical team were always very interested in what the competitors were doing. So any information that I gathered on my travels around fabricators, I would sort of collect and then disperse back to France, be it via an email or send literature to them, so they're aware of what the competitor may be up to or what our fabricators may be doing.
And were you keeping an eye on what fire performance other competitor products had?
I can say that I know that I lost an awful lot of projects with Arconic or Renabond due to not having an A2 rated fire product. So we were losing an awful lot of business in the UK market due to not having this material. So we were losing large projects. As you can imagine, these are high-rise buildings and buildings that this material was being used on. So there was quite a few square meters of project that we were losing in the UK because we just didn't have the material.
And did you communicate that back to Merksheim?
Absolutely, yeah. It was every 6 months or a yearly sales meet, and every weekly report there would have been something about an A2 product that we haven't got, that we're losing.
Were you aware that certainly by 2013, a Lucabond standard material was a Lucabond Plus, which had an FR mineral core, achieving European classification B S1D0? Were you aware of that?
I am certainly aware that a Lucabond had a standard material of FR when I started with the company. As early as that, I knew that a Lucabond was a standard FR material, but I was also told that they were still producing a polyethylene material as well for certain applications. I don't know what their applications would have been for, but their standard material, as I was aware of, would have been an FR material.
When you said to Merksheim, look, guys, we're losing work here because we haven't got an A2 product, we really need that, what was the response that you got back?
The response was, we're working on an A2 product, and we're hopefully will be able to bring it into the market at some stage, but it's very costly, and they were trying to develop an A2 product, and that went on for quite a while. Actually, it was a few years, or I should say 18 months, 2 years before anything actually become of it, and then it didn't break out into the UK market. But that's another thing.
Right. Just information sharing for a moment between you and Merksheim. You've talked about your weekly reports already. Can we just have a look at one of these? If we go MET 53183 at page 300, this is within one of your exhibits. So here what we can see is an email. This is dated the 14th of June 2017 from you to Veronica Defontaine, who was your line manager at this point, yes?
Yes, she was, yes.
Yeah, and you said, please see my report attached. And if we look at page 301 in the next page on this exhibit, here we can see from the top, please find as follows my weekly report for your review. And you begin with the Grenfell Tower disaster in this particular report. Now, I don't want to ask you about the detail of this report, but I want to understand how in practice this worked. Is it right that you were required to write these weekly reports to Merksheim throughout your time as UK sales manager?
Yes, I guess when Lionel McConey became the sales manager, we started reporting to him on a weekly basis of things that were happening within the UK. You see the different topics on that report, and it was a standard thing. It wasn't very in depth, but it just gave them an idea of what was happening. And
what information would those reports usually contain?
So you have to bear with me. I'm trying to go back to, do we have the report would be what, for instance, my fabricators are doing, what projects they have coming up. I don't think there was necessarily any serious figures on there, where it comes to, square meterage figures. I think the projects were probably on there saying this project's due to come in July, and also, what projects we've lost, what projects we can't hold on to because we don't have the right materials.
Do you ever remember writing in one of these weekly reports, we've lost this project because we don't have an A2 product? Do you remember writing that?
I do remember, yeah, on several occasions, and you've probably got the reports to hand, hopefully.
Yeah, I don't think I've got them as part of this plan at the moment, but I'll be corrected if we do have them. I think we've got other reports, but I'm not sure we've seen that. And what was your understanding of what the purpose was of you sending back these reports to Merksheim? I
think it was just to give them the, enlighten them that, what's happening in there. You remember, I'm the ears and eyes for the middleman, if you like, for France. I'm here, and I just give them an insight into why we're losing the projects and perhaps what we need to win projects, and what obviously the A2 would have been a massive benefit to us for larger projects. To go forward and win some good projects. We lost an awful lot, as I said, due to not having this product. So it's something I would have put in the report quite regularly. And where are we with the A2? Are we progressing with it? Are we going to go any further with it? And then we wouldn't really necessarily get any sort of information back. It'd be one-sided, whereas you would sort of perhaps send a report emphasising what we need or where we are, and then that would be put together, and then perhaps on a half-yearly sales meet or a yearly sales meet, something may sort of be mentioned. But
I see. That was my sorry. Okay. Sorry, that was my next question. Was this part of a two-way dialogue on a weekly basis with Merksheim? But I think what you've just told us is effectively you would be submitting these reports on a weekly basis. You wouldn't necessarily get any response, but you would expect some sort of response at the half-yearly sales meetings. Is that right? Yes,
it would be, you would have the progress on where we are with certain projects, or where we are with certain materials and development of materials and moving forward with certain things that they've been working on. But there wouldn't be necessarily any reply to that actual report on a weekly basis. You wouldn't get any returned.
Yeah. And were Claude Verler's team always there as part of those half-yearly sales meetings?
Claude Verler's team they attended the meeting. Usually on a yearly meeting, they would attend for a session of an hour or so. Remembering these are 2-day sales meets, so he would be present at the sales meet, Claude Verler, on most of the sales meetings, and he would present probably for an hour or two throughout the two, at some stage throughout the 2 days, with maybe colleagues presenting certain things to the team now and again.
Right. Did you ever have more frequent dialogue with Claude Verler and his team, and if so, how?
As in, would I speak to them on a regular basis, you mean?
Yes.
I guess Claude, I would email quite regularly throughout the week with issues, if I needed to, asking him to get back to me with queries from customers. Obviously, a very busy man, and he may not have got back to me immediately because he has other clients that he was dealing with. But I would be emailing him for comments, or I need him to look at this photograph and give me some response on what he thinks it may be. He was used quite a bit, I think, from me on a technical side, because that's what I was told to do at the early stages of my employment. That's what they're there for. Yeah.
We also heard evidence from Deborah French about her inputting information into something called a CRM, a customer relationship management database.
Yes.
And is it right that then changed in 2018 to be known as something called a Salesforce database? Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. And you mention this CRM system in your statement. I don't think we need to turn it up. It's at paragraph 40, page 13. you say there that the system allows you to store customer details and the details of particular projects for which the company's been asked to quote. Is that correct?
That's correct. Remembering that the internal staff as well can use that CRM and did input most of the projects onto the CRM. The only projects that I would have put on would have been the ones that I physically had. If I'd seen a client, I'd got that project, I would then download it or put it onto the CRM. Even though my name would come up by the CRM, it would generally be, it could have been generated by anybody at Merksheim. So as I mentioned before, we don't always know what that project is. So if there's a new project on there and there's the correct information on the CRM, because a lot of the time it wasn't given the correct information, you would do your research and try and find out what this project was that was on there, so you could take it further and go and see the client and have a chat. So yes, sorry to go around in circles here.
So did you use it regularly to update the system when there were potential developments about sales?
The project, it should have been used on a daily basis. We were told it should be updated on a daily basis, but it was probably realistically updated by myself once every 3 or 4 days, maybe once every week. That was like most of my colleagues. We did a similar thing, but it was looked at surely, and if it needed to be updated, it would be updated.
Yeah, and I think you've already mentioned, it's right, isn't it? You were supported by the inside sales team at Merksheim.
That's correct. Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Was that normally Gwenaëlle Derendanger?
That was Gwen, yes. Yeah. She initially, and then it changed to Anna Klein.
Yeah, and sometimes Marie-Claude Jordan as well?
Yes, Mary would be sometimes there as well.
Yeah. And is it right that from time to time people from Merksheim would come over to visit the UK?
They would come over on a technical basis. Claude or Nicola Remy, whenever they needed to. A lot of the time, photographs would be taken and sent back to France for them to do some sort of assessment on what I thought the project or the issue might be, and they would give me their advice, if you like, on what the issue might be with the delimitation or whatever it may be. They came over, but not very often.
Right. Yes, I think we're going to come later to a couple of specific visits I want to ask you about. But that was one of my questions. Were these routine visits, or were they always in relation to some specific problem or issue that had arisen that they needed to attend for?
No, we would have our sales manager, Lionel Marconi, would visit now and again to go around customers just to introduce himself again and sort of keep things fresh and explain that we are here, what new developments we've got, what things we're working on, where we are within the industry. Now and again, every, I guess, 3 or 4 months, he may come over to the UK for a day or two just to have a look round the customers with me. But that would be about it. That would be about it, really.
I see. Yeah. Was it your understanding that people at management level at Merksheim were kept well informed of potential and ongoing projects in the UK?
With my projects, I tried to keep them up to date as much as possible and give them as much information on projects that were coming up in the UK. As I said, it's a weekly reporting system, so they were updated every week. And anything that I found that may be relevant or may have some information for them would be forwarded on to France. Yeah.
I want to ask you now about something that's been referred to as the toolbox. And I want to start by looking at Claude Verla's witness statement. This is MET 53190 at page 34. And I want to look at paragraph 116. So I'm just going to read the first half of that of this paragraph with you. He says there, many people within Arconic would be aware of the results of fire tests and or certifications for Arconic products, including Rainabond PE. those who work within the sales teams would all have access to an internal database referred to as the toolbox. This contains technical information in respect of Arconic's products, including reaction to fire classifications for relevant jurisdictions. When a new or updated classification report or certification is obtained by myself or others within my team, it would be added to the toolbox by that team. And sometimes an email would be sent to the sales and marketing department email distribution list, referred to as RAF list intern and RAF list extern, confirming that changes had been made to the toolbox or that new classification reports had been obtained. Now, just pausing there, were you aware of something called the toolbox from the
Yes.
outset of your involvement?
Yes, the toolbox was introduced later in my employment, much later. I don't know if you have a date there to when it was actually introduced, but it was a relatively new thing to Arconic. It was something that they had put together with in the technical team and introduced to us much later on in my employment, where you could go online and have a look at the updates. I think I used it a few times, but it was also for customers to use. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. They could go into the toolbox and look to see, what updates had been made in there, or any sort of literature that might be handy to them. They had access to that. So I was aware of it, but it was a relatively new tool to us.
Give us some help about the time frame when this was introduced. You said much later in your employment. Can you help us as to what year this was introduced?
Just bear with me. I'm trying to think when it would have been. It would have been sometime, and I can't quite give you an exact date, but I would be guessing. I mean, I'm sure you can find out. I'm sure they would tell you at most. I'm not 100% sure, but I would say it was in the last a year before, maybe, or 6 months before the disaster, Grenfell fire. So it was relatively new.
So is it right that this was not something that was in operation when you began your role as UK sales manager, but perhaps in the year before the Grenfell fire, it was introduced during your time as UK sales manager? Is that correct?
I understand they had something similar to it many years ago, called a toolbox of some type, but this was a completely different and new thing that they'd done online. So yes, it wasn't there for me when I started with the company.
And you said that you'd used it just a few times. What had you used it for once it was introduced?
I think, curiosity, I looked at the documentation that was in there and some of the literature when it first began, but it was not relevant to me as such at the beginning. I'm not sure if they carried on with it. I don't know if it carried on, but I knew it was as I said, it was relatively new. So I think it was a customer needed some literature of some type, and I explained that it's in the toolbox. If you go in there, you can find it, because we had problems with sometimes getting back to customers quickly. In fact, that was one of our weaknesses at Arconic, that our turnaround between dealing with a customer when they needed a sample or some literature did take quite a while. So we could lose business over this. And so I think this is one of the reasons why we introduced this, or the technical team introduced this toolbox. So they had access to that system quite quickly, from what I understand.
Prior to that toolbox being introduced, how were you kept appraised of changes in relevant technical classifications, certifications?
I can't ever remember being notified about any changes within the toolbox. I don't know if there was an email that you had to go online to see, but there was nothing that was sent to me personally or on the or on some sort of email saying that we've updated this in the toolbox. I think it was up to the individual to log on and just have a look. Although reading what you'd said prior to us talking, there wasn't an alert or something that they'd sent out. I don't know if I read that wrong, maybe. But yeah, I don't remember any.
Sorry, just thinking back to the time though, prior to the toolbox being introduced, how would you be kept up to date with any changes in relevant technical information relevant to the products you were selling?
That would be done more or less on a 6-month yearly basis. I mean, there wouldn't be any immediate updates given to you. You wouldn't get an email or an alert immediately if there was a change within a document or something. I can't recall ever getting a personal email saying this is a document, this has been changed, you need to look at this, this is important. It would have been something that would have been discussed at a quarterly meeting, because towards the end of my employment, I said the end of after the fire, we were having quarterly meetings. So we were there every quarter. So it would introduce new things and tell you new things, but there was nothing personally sent.
And was your understanding that the reason the toolbox was introduced because of this problem with delay and getting technical information to customers? Is that the reason why it was introduced?
That was my take on it, because we had so much problems with getting back to customers as quickly and as efficiently as what we should have been doing. So this toolbox was not only for the internal staff, the sales external staff and the customer, so they could get some drawings, wind uplift drawings or whatever they might need on there as quickly as they possibly can, and they could download it. That was my take on it. Yes.
And once it was introduced, did you ever explore within it the documents relevant to the UK fire testing regime?
No, I'm sorry, I didn't. No, I didn't look to see there was any change. No.
So Mr. Verla, you've touched on this already, but Mr. Verla says that generally an email would be sent to members of the sales team when there was a new certificate or document to be aware of. But I think what you've said is that wasn't your experience. Is that right?
I'm absolutely, completely honest. I can never remember any document being sent to me via an email saying this document has now changed in the UK. But, you know, there may have been an instance that something was sent, and I generally just cannot remember that being sent to me. But I think if it was done on a regular basis, then I certainly would have remembered emails that were coming through with changes on fire regulations and things, but I can't recall ever seeing it.
Yeah. We saw just now in Claude Verla's statement reference to email distribution lists. We saw this RAF list intern and list extern. And I just want to show you as well something in Mr. Schmidt's witness statement about this. If we can look at that, this is at MET 30/53187 at page 15, paragraph 48. So this is the second witness statement of Claude Schmidt. And I just want to look at what he says at paragraph 48. He says this: in relation to awareness within Arconic of the results of fire performance testing and certification, a number of people within Arconic would have been aware, including the sales team and the technical sales support team. Members of the sales team would be aware of results as they are made available to them through an online system referred to as the toolbox. So we've talked about that. He says Claude Verla and the technical sales support team would upload to the toolbox a new or updated classification report or certification and would notify the sales team via email of any such changes. Such emails were sent to 2 mail distribution lists, RAF list commercial intern, which includes all members of the sales and marketing department that are based in Merksheim, including those working in internal sales, outside sales and technical support, and RAF List Commercial Externe, which includes all members of the sales and marketing departments that are based outside of Merksheim and either employed by Arconic or are its agents, including, for example, Deborah French and Vince Meakins. Do you see that there? Now, we've talked about the toolbox. I now want to ask you about these email distribution lists. Is it right that you would receive emails on the RAF List Commercial Externe, on that group email list?
I can't recall having an email on this email that you mentioned. I just don't understand how Deborah French would be sent that email, because she no longer worked for the company. So
no, I think, sorry, just to interrupt you. I think there he's just saying, for example, while she was working for us, Deborah French would have had that.
Okay, and then you. I understand. Sorry.
So what I'm asking is, are you ever aware of receiving emails from RAF List Commercial Externe?
I can't honestly remember ever getting an email from this. Is this an email address that we're talking about here, or is it yes?
It's said to be a group email address. I'm going to show you an example in just a moment, so that might help.
Right.
But what we're interested in asking you is whether you ever remember receiving any emails via that group list about the testing and certification of Rainabon products.
I'm sorry, I can't remember ever receiving an email. I hope I'm not wrong, but I can't remember ever seeing one.
Okay, let's look at that example. If we go to MET 3 zeros 4 7s 1, MET 3 zeros quadruple 7 1 at page 10. So the operator got that MET 3 zeros, then 77771, page 10. So if we look right at the top of this page, Mr. Meakins, we can see this is an email from Nicolas Remy. It's dated the 23rd of September 2015. It's sent then. And it's to this address at the top, RAF List Commercial Interne and List Commercial Externe. You can see those. So they're these email distribution or mailing lists.
I'm sorry, I think we've got this slightly mixed, where there were, from what I can understand, there were two toolboxes. There was an old toolbox that was used many years ago, and then that wasn't used for quite a few years into my employment, and they reintroduced a toolbox in about, I would guess, 2017, as I said, 18, something like that. And I remember it being launched as the toolbox. This is just before my time, or just after my time, I should say. And this wasn't a toolbox that I was familiar with at all. There are two.
It seems to be some form of email distribution list. So this is from September 2015, and Mr. Schmidt, as we've just seen in his evidence, said that you would have been on that distribution list.
2 months into my employment, or 3 months into my employment, I guess, something like that. The one that I was talking about is the one they introduced much later on. It was a new toolbox, from what I understand. I didn't know they previously had a toolbox, so I'd never even seen this one.
I see.
It's quite confusing, yeah.
but just focusing on this email and this format of email, do you ever remember receiving an email that had come to you via a generic list at Arconic?
No, I don't. I can't remember that at all. Remembering it was just not long after my employment, so I just don't remember that.
We start in the May, and this is 4 months in September that year.
4 months in, yeah.
If we read the email, we can see what it says. We've got some English translation and the French, but we can see under the beginning of the email, in the first paragraph, it says, following the modification of our core recipe, translucide to black, for Rainabond Architecture PE, please find below the updated links to the fire classification reports. And then in bold and underlined, it said the ratings stay the same. Please avoid duplicating files, exclamation mark. And then what we can see a little bit further on is we've got the PE riveted system, and we can see that it's getting a rate or classement of C, and then S2D0, but we see there it's got a C. And then the Rainabond 55 PE cassette system, we can see is getting a class E. Do you see that there?
I can see that, yes, yes.
So is it your evidence that not only do you not recall receiving emails like this, but that you also can't recall receiving this specific email?
Yeah, there's a few things. First of all, I don't remember ever seeing this. I really can't remember it. Secondly, definitely not this version, and I just can't. I wouldn't have understood it at that stage of my employment if it had come through, because I just wouldn't have understood the difference or the terminology.
I see. So even if you had got this, this wouldn't have meant anything to you.
It wouldn't. I would have understood the F, as we mentioned before, if I'd have studied it, and the E. But I just literally started to see customers at that stage. I was not really aware of the products. They were very new to me. So to have a document sent like this to me and not being explained, if you understand what I mean, what it actually means, then it would have been I wouldn't have understood it, to be honest.
Yeah. Would you have understood what was being referred to in that first paragraph about there being a modification of the core recipe from translucide to black? Did you know about that?
I wouldn't have understood that at the time, but we did change the colours of the panels throughout my employment from black to translucent. Later on as well. So this, I understood that later on, that the core had been changed from black to a translucent, but that would have been some years on. But at this time, I wouldn't have understood why, or I wouldn't have really understood it. I'm sorry.
Okay, I understand. Just moving on now to ask you about sales meetings. We've talked about the twice yearly sales meetings. Can we just have a look at Claude Verla's witness statement at this point? MET 40/53190. And I want to look at page 36, paragraph 125.
Excuse me.
So I just want to read some of this paragraph with you. He says, the sales teams also receive information from my team as part of their sales team meetings that usually occur twice a year. I or one of my colleagues would usually provide an update, often taking the form of the provision of statistics, such as the amount of requests the team has addressed, a general update on technical points known in the marketplace, and a discussion of a specific technical subject, which could relate to fire or any other technical matter, such as wind loading, mechanical behaviour, or any claims that have been raised in relation to product matters. Now, just pausing there, I think you've already confirmed that you do recall those twice yearly sales meetings, yes?
Yes, I do, yeah.
And would you, sorry, and would you always attend those sales meetings?
I didn't miss very many. I think most of the sales meetings I would have attended. So yes, most of them would have been attended.
And were they held in Merksheim in France?
Yes, they're all in Merksheim, usually a 2-day sort of thing.
And then he goes on and he says, examples of such presentations where fire classification information was provided include the February 2014 presentation, and he goes on and talks about that. Now, that's before your involvement. But he says this, it includes the February 14 presentation, fire test norms and classification criteria, which confirmed that the PE Class B was no longer valid and that PE was now Class E, as well as providing information relating to types of fire testing and certification in different countries. And then he says this, and the July 2015 technical quiz, which was presented by Philippe Bonthron. This presentation suggests that I manage product system certifications while Philippe manages fire certifications. And then he says, in reality, I manage certification processes and Philippe manages the maintenance and distribution of fire certificates. Now, that July 15 technical quiz presented by Philippe Bonthron would have been during your tenure as UK sales manager. Do you remember participating in that technical quiz?
I can't remember participating in the technical quiz, but something's telling me that I was invited to that sales meet, and I was quite new, so I was a little apprehensive because I'd just started a few weeks prior to that, so it would have been May, June, about 4 or 5, whatever it was, weeks. But I may have gone to the sales meet, but I'm really sorry. I can't be certain that I was at the sales meet. I don't remember taking part in any technical quiz, that's for sure.
Okay. Well, I want to take you to that technical quiz, but Mr. Chairman, that would take us over 4:30, and therefore I think it may be an appropriate moment for a break.
Well, I was going to ask you whether it would make better sense to do that later on. You obviously think it would.
I'd rather do that in one go.
Yeah, of course. Mr. Meakins, I don't know whether anyone's warned you that we might need to ask you to come back, so to speak, on Monday.
Yes, I have, sir. Yeah, yes.
I'm sorry, I'm sure that's inconvenient for you, but I think we're going to have to ask you to do that.
That's fine, sir. Absolutely fine.
All right. Well, that's good of you. Thank you very much. So we'll we'll break now. We'll resume at 10 o'clock on Monday morning.
Thank you.
And I know there are quite a few days between now and Monday, but I have to remind you, please, not to talk to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it over the weekend.
Of course. Absolutely, right, sir. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. We'll look forward to seeing you on Monday.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. 10 o'clock on Monday, then, please.
Thank you, sir.